John Pollock here alongside Cody Saftic, and UFC 207 is way in the history books at this point.
That was last year, John.
We're going to drag in the history book and open it up because you were actually there live for the card. And what was the atmosphere like in the arena throughout this card? Because you were noting that it was the most attended show in the history of the UFC, running the T-Mobile Arena of their 3 events, but not consistent from first fight to last fight.
No, not consistent at all. I think the biggest part of the atmosphere was everyone was there to see Ronda Rousey, and I really took note of that people talk about stars and, well, building a star and what goes into creating a star. And in Ronda Rousey's case, I mean, no matter what, you can't argue the fact that she's not a star. There was kids there, John, with the Ronda Rousey haircut, done up the same way. They had dolls, they had posters, they had shirts. Nobody was in the arena until the Ronda Rousey fight, until she was getting ready to come out. That's when people came in. When she lost, it went silent. It was quiet. People were leaving right away. I saw a couple people crying. It was almost, she's larger than life in some ways. And then to see her lose like that, and to see her lose that aura, and to see people go online and say, she's done, she's going to retire, it really hit home. And just, that's how fast it goes in this sport. One day you're on top of the world, the next day you're at the bottom of the pack, whether she sticks around or she retires or not. I think it was a real, I definitely felt like I had to go down there to see the Ronda Rousey show, to see whether it was going to be her last performance, to see whether she could rebound from that devastating loss to Holly Holm and taking that time off. The answer was obviously no. No, she could not rebound from that. But it was also a special moment in the arena seeing that and seeing that how much she really has done for the sport, because if she was not on that card, from what I saw from every other fight, there was another title fight on the card, Cruz and Garbrandt, a fantastic fight, might I add. If she wasn't on that card, I have to think, take out all those Rousey fans that were there specifically to see her, that specifically showed up late to see her, take all of them out. That was not the most sold show in the T-Mobile Arena. So very interesting in many ways.
Yeah, and the pay-per-view number isn't out yet, but I think that's going to be really interesting to see how much of an impact she had for a Friday night card, because we have the precedent of what happened when Brock Lesnar was put on Friday night, and to see if Ronda Rousey exceeds that figure. Now, also on the show, we had a pair of fighters who missed weight in Johny Hendricks and Ray Borg, and different outcomes for each of them. We'll start with Ray Borg, who, came in at 129.5 pounds, was docked a percentage of his purse, but then came out and just dominated Louis Smolka over the course of 3 rounds. So it's a bit of a dilemma, because this guy looks great, but do you reward a guy who missed weight? What do you do with somebody now of Ray Borg's stature with a win like this?
Well, people always talk about, if you're going to miss weight, then you got to go out and have a spectacular performance. And in many ways, yes, that's exactly what Ray Borg did. It was a shutout, 30-27. It was an impressive performance. But when you miss weight, especially 129.5, that's nearly 5 pounds over championship weight. Ray Borg is a guy that's made championship weight, 125, one single time in his career. He generally comes in at 126 flat. And at that, he's hurting. He's missed weight before. This would now be the 2nd time. And he's also pulled out of his fight with Ian McCall due to illness, which is due to weight cutting issues. So for him to then come out and say, I've got the weight cutting under control. I hate when the media brings up my weight. Well, you've missed weight. You've had a troublesome time doing so. And Ray Borg is a high contender. His only loss being against Justin Scoggins, a guy that also cannot make the weight, has been moved up to 135. So I think it's very interesting when you got a guy like Scoggins, he can't make 125, they ship him up to 35. John Lineker, he can't make 125, they ship him up to 35. Ray Borg, I'm not saying he can't make the weight. It's only been 2 misses. However, there's a lot of indications that he can't really comfortably make the weight. So do you reward this guy with a title shot? I would have to say absolutely not. Do you put this guy in another couple fights and try to see, listen, kid, can you make the weight? Yes, but people need to consider here that Ray Borg's a young kid, and he's getting bigger by the day. And the weight cutting issues seem to be getting harder by the day. So I understand he probably wants to fight with Demetrius Johnson as soon as possible. But you can't reward a guy missing weight and then give him a title shot. It can't be that way. And I feel bad for Smolka, a guy who your opponent misses weight by 5 pounds, and guess what? He manhandles you in that fight. So had he made the weight, maybe it changes the dynamic completely.
Yeah, it's still something I'm not crazy about when there's a weight, someone misses weight, and by a significant margin when you're talking 129.5 pounds, and Louis Smolka, for all intents and purposes, could say, listen, I'm not taking this fight when you're at that weight. Yes, you're penalized on your purse, but then Smolka comes out. There's no asterisk next to that loss. And Ray Borg, I'm not going to say that the fact that he did come in higher led to him having significant advantages over Smolka, but Smolka did make the weight. He put in those extra pounds to make the weight. So I think that it's always somewhat unfair to the guy that is kind of backed into a corner to take the fight, no matter how much a guy misses weight by.
Yeah, and I think that's when the commission should come in and put a cap. If it's 7 pounds, maybe that's the And we've seen in some commissions there has to be that discrepancy, but not every commission. So for 5 pounds, what fighter is going to turn it down for 5 pounds? You know, your reputation's at the line. The fans are going to jump on your back and say, oh, this guy didn't really want to fight. So I feel bad for Smolka. He more or less has to take that fight. But yes, you're completely right. Let's say they give him the 30% of Borg's purse, which they did. But you're not getting your win bonus because you've now lost the fight. So the 30% doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's a loss, and that loss has now shifted you in the back of the packing order. But I look at a guy like Wilson Hayes that should have gotten the title fight. He now has to settle for a lesser fight. He wins in spectacular fashion. For a guy like Borg to just jump over him, that would be certainly unfair. You got to make the weight. First and foremost, you signed a contract to make the weight. You have to make it. Johny Hendricks didn't make it as well. He loses 20%. Borg misses by more weight. He lost 30%. How could you then talk your way into a title fight, big victory or not? I just don't see it.
Is there a fighter in 2016 whose stock has fallen more than Johny Hendricks? And it's looking at relative terms. Here was a guy that held the welterweight title in 2014, and this year was a very difficult year for Johny Hendricks. He wasn't able to fight in October of 2015 against Tyron Woodley because of he didn't even get to the scale in time. He had to be taken to the hospital. And then this year, you look at the problems against Kelvin Gastelum, and then that was compounded by this loss to Neil Magny. And granted, it was a close fight. Yep. I scored it for Neil Magny, 29-28. But I did not watch that fight and see a lot of what got Johny Hendricks to that level as a welterweight champion. It just seems someone that he's got that foundational wrestling. Those takedowns were there for him, but couldn't do a whole lot with those takedowns.
Well, Johny Hendricks, as you mentioned, someone whose stock has just plummeted massively, and you have to think there's something missing in Johny Hendricks. Whether it is that the weight is just so hard to cut nowadays, whether he's not motivated, whether maybe he's just taken the wear and tear of fighting for so long at a high level and wrestling for so long at a high level. But there's certainly something missing in Johny Hendricks. And when he goes before the fight and says, well, you know what, if I lose this fight, I'm going to retire. Then he trying to retract those statements and says, well, yeah, we'll see how the fight goes. The fight did not go well. I know a lot of people might say that Johny Hendricks won that fight. I didn't see it that way. And it wasn't so much that it wasn't a close fight, because it was. He was getting the takedowns when he wanted to. His control on the ground seemed well. But it's his ability to... It doesn't seem like he's trying to finish the fight whatsoever. He's more so just holding on for dear life. And you see that in these performances. Yes, Stephen Thompson smokes him, we'll take that out of it. But against Kelvin Gastelum, he's noticeably flat. He's noticeably doesn't have that extra gear that he may be used to. But against Neil Magny, this was the perfect storm of all these terrible performances coming together. I mean, Neil Magny is certainly a winnable fight for a guy like Johny Hendricks. When you look at the levels that Johny Hendricks attained not so long ago compared to where Neil Magny is at, it should have been Johny Hendricks all day. The odds makers had Neil Magny as a favorite right from the get-go. Johny Hendricks has a super bizarre pre-fight interview, and now the odds makers almost got Neil Magny as a 2-1. There's just no faith in Johny Hendricks. There's no confidence in Johny Hendricks. I would have to say that's largely due to the weight cut. You see him talking to Ariel Helwani and members of the media, and it's all there. He's slumping because his body's shutting down because of the weight cut. His mouth's dry because he's dehydrated. He's not making sense in the interview because his brain's dehydrated. They say, well, he's only about a pound over, but he misses weight by 2.5 pounds, technically 1.5 pounds. Everything's just off for Johny Hendricks. And the logical explanation, the logical answer is you just go to 185. But he doesn't want to do so, and he even says that you're not going to be a champion at 185. I'm sorry, Johny Hendricks, you're not going to be a champion at 170. You've lost 3 in a row, you're in your mid-30s, you're down on the back 9 of your career here. Maybe the move to 185, similar to Kelvin Gastelum, would give him an extra gear, would at least give him some more gas in the tank, because that's seriously what's lacking. Big Rig just doesn't have any gas in his tank anymore. He can't fight a hard 3 rounds.
What do you foresee happening with him? Is this going to be just a break from the sport? Is that what he needs? Is there that one button you can press that suddenly hits the reset for Johny Hendricks? Because I don't know if it's something simple as adjusting camps again or moving weight classes. I mean, this is a guy who has been cutting weight his entire life. I think he's put a lot of miles on his body, and this is the natural progression of an athlete, where sadly we are there to watch the decline at the end of it. And that was 2016 for Johny Hendricks. And maybe he'll make fools of us this year and change things around, but I don't see the evidence that suggests that.
No, I would love to see him turn things around. Certainly I think a move to 185 would at least be better for his body all around. If he's not fighting for the UFC, does he retire? I'm not so sure. I think a move to Bellator would make sense in large ways. But my final point on this, and it's very interesting, a couple years back he was the champion, UFC champion, and they took, I think it was E3 Games as a picture of him versus Douglas Lima, the Bellator champion, and they're squaring off. And Douglas Lima is twice the size of Johny Hendricks. And at the time, everyone thought, Johny Hendricks would kill Douglas Lima. Now you think to yourself, in 2017, Douglas Lima is still a welterweight, a very large welterweight, and he's currently the Bellator champion. If Johny Hendricks went over to Bellator, Would you be favoring Johny Hendricks over Douglas Lima these days? Probably not. But it also goes to serve that Johny Hendricks is not even a really big welterweight. He'd be a very, very, very small middleweight. And if you consider some of the guys that fight at 185 pounds and the size that they have on him, I don't know what the recipe for Johny Hendricks is. He used to be that double threat guy. He's got the wrestling, and the wrestling is phenomenal, and he's got that big left hand. He's got that power. That left hand's gone. That power is gone. The wrestling's still there, but he doesn't have any real jiu-jitsu on the ground. He's not actively trying to submit guys. His ground and pound is not noteworthy by no stretch of the imagination. He's really just become that stock wrestler. And when you strip him down to his basic parts and he's just that stock wrestler, well then yeah, the game's really passed him by. It's evolved. And it's just so crazy that that's the one thing about MMA. One day you're on top of the world and the next day you're not. It's not like he just lost one fight, not like he just lost 2 fights. Now you're seeing the real decline here, and I think it's just getting worse and worse. So I'm interested in seeing what happens in the next fight, if there is a next fight. But at the same time, as someone who likes Johny Hendricks, I don't want to see him go get hurt. So if you're not feeling up to it, by all means, you don't know anybody anything.
All right, that is going to close the book on UFC 207. For Cody Saftic, I'm John Pollock. Thanks for watching.